If you would grab your Bibles, please, and turn to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. We're going to be looking at verses 30 through 37 this morning. So Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. You know, there it was right on the front page of the newspaper. The little newspaper, our little town paper, was my 11-year-old chubby face right on the front page wearing one of my absolute favorite t-shirts, and my mom was horrified by the whole thing. I got this particular t-shirt from my uncle because I was, even at 11 years old, I was already wearing adult kind of clothing. So you can, sometimes, you know, adult clothing has kind of more adult content on it than a typical kid would wear. And it happened to be this t-shirt, and my mom absolutely hated it. She hated its message and everything that it stood for, and I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing. And I think that's the reason why it made it on the front page, because I was wearing it. Our little area was having this little, I was sponsored by the DNR, but it was just get kids out in the woods. You know, let them explore, let them run around, figure out what trees are called, and you know what you can use things for. How to, you know, we built bird houses, and then we went fishing. We just enjoyed the outdoors. That's all it really was. And I'm sure my mom thought, you can wear that shirt because if something happens to it, I really won't mind at all. And not realizing that on that particular day, the newspaper was going to be there taking pictures, doing interviews, and lo and behold, not only did it do that, but there I am on the front page above the fold with my name and my face and where I live, and then right there as I'm leaning over, you can read the full lettering of the t-shirt. And I'm sure you're wondering, like, what did it say? And it was just simply this: I'm not conceited, I'm just better than you. And my mom's like, oh, what? Why did you? Oh, and I know why I was wearing that shirt, and I love that shirt. I thought it was funny, and I kind of still do. And I don't think it's true, but I think it's funny. And you know, as he did all that, but you know, somebody somewhere thought that shirt was a good idea. You know, somebody came up with that and said, let's put that on a shirt. Somebody will buy it, because truth be told, many of us think that way. We just never admit it. But you know, you can put it on a t-shirt and you don't have to say anything. You know, the shirt says it all for you. But the reality is that we live in a day and an age in where there are a lot of people, and if we're not careful, we ourselves will adopt that kind of an attitude that I'm better than you in some capacity, in some area. And in fact, what we're going to find is that the disciples themselves are going to be arguing over that very thing this morning. You know, what's worse is MacArthur was commenting on this passage himself. He was talking about the idea that our culture has even gone so far as to relabel it and call it this area of self-esteem. And he said, you know, that sounds good on the surface, like self-esteem. Think better of yourself. Go do these kinds of things. But it says it's really pride and arrogance and a lack of humility kind of repackaged. And you think, well, how does that work? Because usually people that are suffering from like low self-esteem are like, oh, this is awful, things aren't going well. But yes, but you think you deserve better. You deserve better than what you have. Maybe your capabilities or your talents or your gifts or the way life has gone for you. It's not gone well, and you're frustrated by these things. But at the end of the day, you think, I deserve better than this. That is still in another form just pride repackaged. And our culture celebrates that, and it has not gone well. And you can read all kinds of studies about who came up with that idea and why it's harmful, because they've come to that criminals feel pretty good about themselves in our day and age. And you can read that. Why? Because they've been taught self-esteem. But the question for us this morning that I think we want to answer is, like, how can I be humble, or how can I exhibit humility in a very arrogant world? That was a question the disciples needed to figure out. It's a question that we need to understand for ourselves. And Jesus is going to not just tell us, but eventually He's actually going to show us that answer. Good servants are not always masters, but good masters are always servants. And that's what Jesus is going to model for us this morning. So let's read some of these verses here for us. Mark chapter 9, verse 30 through 32. They, speaking of the disciples, went on from there and passed through Galilee. And He did not want anyone to know, for He was teaching His disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill Him. And when He is killed, after 3 days He will rise. But they did not understand the saying, and were afraid to ask Him. The Master is not concerned about being a servant. Not at all. And as they begin this journey, we realize this isn't just a normal journey from point A to point B. This is like the big journey. They're still up in that Caesarea Philippi, kind of on the north, way above even the Sea of Galilee, and they're working their way back down. They're eventually going to arrive in Capernaum, kind of for a layover, but this is this journey that they're on, and they don't realize, like, this is it. This journey isn't just going to be landing and stopping in Capernaum. Jesus is working his way all the way down to Jerusalem and ultimately the cross. This is really that last journey, that last moving about. And for the most part, Jesus is done with big events, big meetings, and big teaching sessions. We're going to have some. But not like before. There is a noticeable transition in the book of Mark and really all the Gospels, and we start and change that focus, because Jesus is now focused squarely on the disciples and a handful of lessons he's going to teach them, and then the cross. This is where he's headed. This is where everything is going. That first lesson we looked at last week was faith. He's going to do that. He's going to pick up on that again a little bit later on. But for right now, the lesson that we're learning here is one on humility. One of humility. And so that's what we're working to. And so because of this one-on-one teaching time that he's desiring, we understand why does Jesus want the secrecy? Why does he desire the privacy? Because it's not about everybody else now. It's really about him, the disciples, and the cross. And so that's why, a little bit of context reason why we're looking at this way, the way that we are. And as we come to verse 31, we see Jesus kind of getting to this end here. And he tells us it's the second of 3 times in which Jesus kind of lays out, really in a very condensed form, the events of the Passion Week. All right, so that's what we're looking at here. And it happens to be the simplest of these 3 explanations. And of course, the disciples don't get it at all. We've come to expect that at this point, I think. But in verse 31, notice how he begins this conversation with them. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. And that phrase, as simple as it is loaded. It's a bit of a play on words. If you notice, the Son of Man is given into the hands of men. There's a play on words that's going on there that I think we're supposed to pick up on. But if you were one of the disciples, or even for us, to look at this a little bit and understand this, we have to unpack this. And the question sometimes comes up, why didn't Jesus make it just more obvious that he was in fact the Son of God? Why didn't he just champion that from day one and just, hey, I am the Son of God, and tell everybody that? Instead, we have a passage like this where the Son of Man, and then he goes on, and I'm sure Peter and some of these other guys, if they were really honest with themselves, was okay, you're a Son of Man. What does that make me? Right? I mean, it feels like we're saying something painfully obvious, and yet Jesus uses that almost really like a title. He's using it constantly, and we don't sometimes realize there's an import, there's a context to where that comes. And so keep your finger in Mark, but if you would actually turn back to the book of Daniel chapter 7, we want to see where that's coming from and understand that actually Jesus the entire time has been claiming to be God, but he did so in a way that could really fly underneath the radar and that people wouldn't necessarily pick up on until later on down the line. But Daniel chapter 7 is where that particular title comes from, and we're specifically going to be looking at verses 13 through 14. And it says this: I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. So there's our title. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So we look at that and we think, wait, who does that sound like? One like the Son of Man standing before, God? We've been studying the book of Revelation, and we've been looking through chapters 4 and 5, and we've really picked up on that a lot, where it's Jesus standing before the Father, taking the scroll from his hand and beginning to break those seals and unleash what we call the tribulation, or the Great Tribulation. We see those kinds of things here, but we look at this context in Daniel, and we start realizing, wait, that can't be just some normal guy. No human being could live up to those expectations. His kingdom will last forever. Glory and dominion and a kingdom to a human being? I mean, David is probably one of the most recognized and celebrated kings that Israel ever had. And though God had told him, your house, there will always be someone from your house sitting on this throne, this is more significant than that. And we realize, like, really only someone like God could do these kinds of things. And so really what we find is that every time Jesus was using that title, he was indirectly saying, that's me. That's me. Next, as we look at that phrase again, it says delivered. He will be delivered over. And that again was also a term that was used in Jewish martyrdom. The Jews knew a lot about what it meant to be martyred. And that delivered over was one in which they would use in that context often. They understood what that meant, the implications that were there. And the disciples would have picked up on that. And here we find it's actually a divine passive. Who's handing him over? It doesn't actually say. That's why sometimes people categorize this as a divine passive. It's actually God handing him over into the hands of men. That's what's implied. Judas, of course, if we know our Bibles, we know the stories. Like, well, Judas is the one that actually, kisses him on the cheek and points to the Romans, for silver. Like, we get all that. And that's certainly true. We're not denying that or discounting that. And yet we have to understand at the end of the day that standing behind Judas was God himself. It was God that was handing over Jesus into the hands of men to be crucified. Judas might have meant this all for evil. But at the end of the day, we realize that God meant this for our good. He's in control. They would have picked up on this. The hands of men, it says, he concludes in this phrase. We realize that Jesus will be killed for the benefit of the very ones who kill him. So God will hand over God into the hands of men who will then proceed to kill him. I mean, that's if the disciples are putting everything together, which they're probably not, but if they put that all together, like, wow, wait, God is handing over God into the hands of men who will then kill him. Now, they don't understand this Trinitarian kind of an aspect like we have a much better grasp on. So certainly this would have been confused, and we can understand why they're so confused and why they're afraid in verse 32 that they were afraid to ask him, because they're like scratching their heads going, what? What? You're a martyr and God's handing you over and you're using this title again. Like, all of these things are coming together and they're afraid of it. They don't understand everything that's going on. And I think that understands why every time Jesus brings these things up, they just kind of like, they don't even know what, I think they're afraid to ask, but I think they don't even know what to ask. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But it does if you start looking at passages like Isaiah 53. And you don't have to turn there, but Isaiah 53, that suffering servant that we look at, it would be awesome to just have time to read the entire chapter. We really don't have that time. But I just want to read verses 5 and 6 for you. But it says this, but he, talking about the suffering servant who we understand as Jesus, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. See, that passage was never associated with the Messiah. That was something different. I'm not exactly sure how they viewed that or what they did with that, but they didn't put that together with the Messiah because it didn't fit. It's contrary to a conqueror. It's contrary to a king. It's contrary to a warrior. It didn't fit. And yet it points to our greatest need. It pointed to their greatest need. See, the disciples are so consumed with this Roman enslavement, this Roman oppression, that that's all they can see, and they don't realize there's something larger than even the Romans that are enslaving you, that are oppressing you. It's your own sinfulness. You need that to be forgiven. They don't get that. And the reality is, as we get into this modern age, we're still struggling with a lot of those same things. Now, hopefully in Christ we get it. But it's so easy to get stuck on the things that we can see around us and think, well, no, our immediate need is this person who's oppressing me, or this person who's enslaving me, or this problem that's in my life, or this disease, or any number of things that are out there. They're against me, they're enslaving me, they're oppressing me, they're keeping me down. And we can focus so much on these temporal things, these time-bound things, the things that we're dealing with here and now. And Jesus is saying, no, there's something far larger that's hanging over your head. You might not see it, you might not understand it, but your greatest problem in life is your sinfulness. The broken relationship that you have as a result with God. That's your greatest problem. That's why I'm here. And that's what they do not understand. It's going to enslave you for eternity if it doesn't change, if something doesn't happen. And Jesus is trying to tell him, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to free you from this. And then as he goes on in this passage, he's not just leaving himself dead. He says they will kill him, but he's killed. 3 days later, he will rise again. He's telling them, he's giving them the complete picture. Now they've only ever seen Jesus do that. You know, they knew their Bible. They would have known like Elijah and Elisha and some of those stories and things like that. But they've never seen anyone in person do that except for Jesus. But if Jesus is the one that needs to be resurrected, well, who's going to do that? Remember the last time the disciples tried their hand at something? Remember the exorcism? That didn't work out so well. They needed Jesus to come down the mountain and help them. But if Jesus is the one that is dead, that needs the resurrection, who's going to help them if this doesn't work? The pressure's kind of on. So they're like freaking out inside and everything that's going on. What are they supposed to do? Who's going to help them? They just don't get, none of it makes sense. But Jesus is on a journey of humiliation. He really has been since his birth, or really even his conception. His entire existence on earth is really what we would sometimes refer to as his humiliation, or the humiliation of Christ. Jesus, as God, had the right to never experience life in flesh. He had the right to never experience hunger, to never experience thirst, to never experience pain and suffering and tragedy. And yet it's like he's marching right for it, making a beeline for it because he's headed towards the cross. And the reason for the cross in and of itself was humiliating in and of itself, like to another level. Being crucified implied you were a criminal, that you were guilty of something, you had done something. That's humiliating. The method of the cross itself was to strip of you every level of dignity you could possibly have and hang on to or try to. Typically it was done while you were naked. You had nothing covering you up anymore. The Jews seemingly had some exceptions made because the Jews were so against that. But you can imagine, in very little clothing hanging out there for everybody to walk past you, and you would live like that normally for days, gasping for breath, and people would be walking past and mocking you and thinking that you were a criminal, and it's just embarrassing, and it's humiliating, and it's painful, and it's long. And it was designed to be all those things. And he's going right for it. And not only that, it's humiliating because Jesus had been at the peak of his ministry. He'd been at the top. It won't be very long before Jesus goes into Jerusalem. They call the Triumphal Entry. Remember that they're taking their cloaks off and they're throwing them on the streets and they're taking palm branches and they're waving them down and Hosanna, Hosanna, and they're praising him. And it's only going to be a week later that the same crowd is going to be saying, crucify him. Crucify him. And yet Jesus was he's kind of like the first celebrity. He's like, anywhere he goes, people instantly recognize him. They know who he is. They know what he can do and the influence that he has, and he can share this. And it's like he's throwing it all away. Like he's some kind of a masochist or something. That's not what you're supposed to do. I mean, the Pharisees understood that. The Jews understood that. They were always jockeying for power. They were always trying to get more power, more prestige, more position. How can I position myself to be better, to have more power, to have more influence? Jesus is doing everything wrong. And when you consider the true nature of Jesus, it's even more surprising. Why would the Creator of the world subject himself to this kind of suffering? It really doesn't make any sense. But it was the only way that our sins could be forgiven and God's justice maintained. If there was another way, outside of the cross, any other way, don't you think he would have done it? Why would anyone put themselves through this? But forgiveness demands sacrifice on the part of the forgiver. It always does. When you forgive someone, there is a sense in which you are absorbing that wrong that's been done to you, and you're not retaliating. You're not pushing back. You're not doing any of those things. You're taking it all in and you're refusing to act. You're forgiving. It requires sacrifice, and certainly this is a sacrifice, and of course it's a bloody sacrifice because it's all the tie-ins because of God's justice demanded death, and Jesus freely gave it. And yet when we consider who Jesus is, he is the master. He's giving his life for his servants. He's not asking his servants to sacrifice themselves for him. That's normally the way things would work. Protect the king, protect the master, sacrifice yourselves. Not Jesus. He's going there first and foremost. And according to Philippians 2:9, he will be exalted in the end. But of course, none of this makes sense to them. They're looking for that conqueror. And he's telling them the way to win is really by losing. It's almost like, if we put this in a different context, it would make no sense. We go back to World War II, it would be like Patton going against the Allies, the Germans, and say, hey, you want to win this war, then we have to lose. Who's going to follow that guy? He said, no, it's a secret. We'll lose, and that will actually beat them by losing to them. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's essentially what Jesus is telling them. We have to lose. And that's how we'll win. That's how we'll become the king. Would you know what to ask? A follow-up question? They didn't either. But not only is Jesus telling them what is to come, he has honestly just given them a master's class on what it means to be humble leader and serve others. Extravagantly serve others. And they've missed it on every level. Let's read it down a little bit further here. Picking up in verse 33. And they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. The servants are concerned about becoming masters. And that's what they're consumed by. They're talking behind Jesus' back. I honestly think, again, this is kind of funny. I don't know, they're traveling from Caesarea Philippi down. They're eventually going to arrive in Capernaum in our little passage here. And, I don't know how exactly their traveling looked. They broke off into groups. They were single file. They're just walking. They're doing their thing and probably talking about all kinds of various things along the way. But there must have been at least a sizable group who had broken off maybe towards the back or towards the front. And they're having a conversation. The language actually behind that for that talking is more like argument. They're probably really getting into it. And so they get to this house and they all sit down and Jesus asked them, so what are you guys talking about? Silence. Right? They know they've been caught. They know they've been caught. And they've been in these situations enough times that they realize, they've seen Jesus interact with the Pharisees and other people. Like, he already knows what you were thinking. He already knows everything that that's going on. Like, do you really want to open your mouth and insert your foot at this point? He already knows. And so they don't say anything. The reality is, for ourselves, though, are our conversations along the journey of life any different? Are they any less embarrassing? Or are we not also consumed as we follow Jesus with our position, with our honor, with who's the greatest? Can you imagine if along this journey that we would somehow be able to come along and follow, we're doing our thing and we're having conversations and we're talking maybe in our own head or whatever, and Jesus would just suddenly just poof, there he is, right? And you'd be like, he could have scared you. You're surprised. You're trying to catch your breath and everything that's going on. Man, Jesus, I hate it when you do that. And he goes, so what were you talking about? What were you thinking? Would you want to answer? Because he has you dead to rights. You're like, well, this is what I was thinking. And we were actually comparing ourselves to someone. We're thinking that we were better than someone else. We're still looking for prominence. And it really can be in every area of life. It can be in school or work, church or the home or neighborhoods. At the end of the day, we have to agree with my t-shirt. You're not conceited, but I am better than you. We think that. We act that way. And yet God has called each of us to serve, but it's really hard to serve someone that you think that you're better than. If you're in school, can you serve your classmates? Can you love them in that way? You think, well, how am I supposed to do that? You're thinking if grades are your thing, you're really good at that, then in certain subjects you might really be able to help come alongside someone and tutor them. I mean, you don't want to adopt the whole like philosophy of like, okay, grasshopper, welcome to class, and like, this arrogant kind of approach to things that you're the master and they have to learn from you. But to come inside and say, you know what? I think I really get this pretty well. I see that you're struggling. Can I help you? Maybe you can work through this a little bit and help that. Why not? Or in sports. In sports, you realize you have certain abilities. You're doing pretty well, and you know what? You want to improve the team. Help those that are struggling with some of these things. Hey, let's do an extra workout after class. Or let's work on some of those ball skills. Let's do some of these things together. And coming alongside, like, let's do this, not because you can do something for me, but so that you can improve, so that you can be better. I want to serve you. I want to help you. Don't look at the kid like he's the next ball boy. Like, truly serve, truly love him in that regard, or her, whatever it happens to be. In church also, we understand, like, how can we serve one another? How can we do that? And many of you do. Whether it's playing the instruments or the ushering or the sound room guys or the various classes, the Sunday schools and instrumentation or, the various other jobs and roles. Somebody cleans the coffee pot every week. I mean, all these little things, they don't maybe seem like that big of a deal, but it is someone who's saying, you know what? How can I serve you this week? That's an awesome thing. And it's not something that we should just discount and just think, well, that's not that big of a deal. It is. It is a big deal. If you want to be great, Jesus says, then grab a towel. That's the way that Jesus did too in John 13. But when we graduated, my wife and I graduated from Northland, we had some parting gifts they gave us, and one of those things was a hand towel, just a plain, simple white towel, and on that little, I don't know what that thing is called. You're like 3 inches from the bottom. There's that band or whatever. I'm sure it has a name, but they would put on there, "Be great, serve." Everybody got one. And granted, we were specifically a ministry school, but the goal behind that was, they said, just because you're in ministry, it doesn't mean that you can't be self-serving, that you can't be selfish, that you can struggle with pride and arrogance and really make the church all about yourself, because you do that. And then we've seen that happen. And they said they wanted to send us off and said, don't ever forget this. And Northland tried very, very hard, and I'm sure other schools do too, but to drive it into us, don't take that mentality that the church serves you. You should be serving the church in whatever capacity you can. I've been watching some various other pastors online, and I enjoy watching that, and I'm amazed sometimes. Some of these are just curious, like, who is this guy? And I'm amazed sometimes they're talking, it's going okay, and they're doing their thing, and then they happen to segue, like, hey, let me tell you about my new book that's available for sale in the lobby. You can pick up on the after church for $19.95, and it's like this shameless sales pitch. And I'm like, wow, really? And you can almost feel like it's coming. And they start talking about these kinds of things, and I understand, like, if you wrote a book, I'd be pretty excited about that too. If I wrote one and be able to share that. But I mean, really? I mean, the church does not exist to simply buy your books. Speaking of which, if you have an opportunity in the lobby, you might be able to pick up my latest book, the 10 Most Humble People in the World and How I Trained the Other 9. It is not for sale anywhere, thankfully. It kind of ruins it though, doesn't it? It really does kind of ruin it, and we have to be careful with these kinds of things. And pastors and church people, we can be just as guilty. But we get to this group here, these disciples, and we find a bunch of grown men. We find a bunch of grown men arguing, who's the greatest? I mean, this is the kind of conversation you'd expect to find on the playground. And that's what they're arguing over. And yet we also realize that these are the ones that will lay the foundation of the church. And if they can be susceptible to these kinds of conversations and these kinds of discussions, we have to understand we're not immune from them either. We're really not. I think that's why verse 35 gets into what I'm going to call remedial humility. But Jesus, he sits down and he calls the 12 together. He's taken the position of a rabbi. He's taken the position of a teacher. Let me teach you. Let me show you something. And then this is what makes this scenario so sad, is Jesus has just told them what he's about to do for them. At such great cost to himself. And they weren't even listening. They didn't hear a single word of how the master was going to serve them. They're so consumed about them as servants becoming masters, being able to rule over one another and lots of people. And yet how often do we pursue our own glory and interests? We become tone deaf, I think, in many ways to the calls of humility that are all around us. And so he tells them again, if you want to be great, and who doesn't? If you want to be great, serve everyone. Serve them all. You have to become the lowliest of servants like I am. Because greatness in the Christian life is at the bottom. It's not the top. It's a paradox. What's amazing with that is, because it's at the bottom, it's within everybody's reach. You know, if this was something that you had to be this super special Christian, this super special person, or talented or gifted, or in any number of areas, like, it would be one of those things you would have to work to, you would have to climb towards and be able to reach, and finally, suddenly, slowly over the course of time, now you can kind of reach the top shelf, so to speak. But he's like, that's not how this works. You want to be great in the Christian life? He puts it on the bottom shelf. You know, where all the little 1-year-olds can play and reach everything. That's where he puts it. It's obtainable for all of us because he said it requires you to simply serve people. It's not about how gifted you are in all these areas. In other words, you want to be great? You want to be great? Then be great in the things that matter. Serve. Put other people ahead of yourself. And then Jesus finishes these last 2 verses with really what amounts to an illustration. He says, the least of these. Just to drive this point home, he's probably in Peter's home. It's my guess of where he happens to be. And he grabs a nearby child. I'm assuming Peter's. It's probably like I don't know if one of them was like running through the room, they're meeting or something, like, kind of what's happening with all these Zoom meetings that are going on. The kids are running, chaos ensues. Things happen. Well, here's their Zoom meeting, and Jesus grabs one of these kids. He says, like embrace this child. And he grabs this kid and he embraces him and he pulls him close. And you have to understand, if we look at this scene the way, like as a modern American, we completely miss the point. We have to understand and look at this, and what Jesus is doing is so strange and so bizarre, especially because this isn't his own child. But he grabs this child and he holds this child, and the society in which they lived, ours revolves around kids. Theirs was the opposite. You didn't welcome, they were truly a gift from God, but you didn't view them the same way. It was a totally different mentality. They were looked down upon, very much so. And they were considered the lowest members of society. Partly because of probably a high infant mortality rate, also because of a high demand for human labor. There was a lot of separations that took place, probably distancing themselves from pain and some other things like that. Embracing this child, which, by the way, the Aramaic word for child and servant are the same. I think it gives you a little bit of a framework of the context and how they view these kids. But to accept others the way that Jesus is accepting this child was to accept someone that could do nothing for you. They're vulnerable. They're needy. They're incapable. And Jesus is telling them, to his disciples, he said, this is what you are to me. You're vulnerable. You're incapable. And yet I have embraced you. And you really can't do anything for me. I'm using you and I'm working with you, but you really can't repay me in this. It's not to my advantage to come down here and do all these things to you, because I'm suffering and I'm hurting and I'm going to die on a cross for you. And yet here I am. There are plenty of other places in Scripture where Jesus commands them, be like a little child, have faith like a little child. That's not what he's doing here. He's ultimately telling them, you need to treat other people, these children, look at them like this, that they can't help you, and embrace them anyway. Embrace those who can do nothing for you. Those who are seemingly beneath you in some way. But there's no advantage. Well, they will not pay you. They cannot maybe love you. There's no friendship. There's no obligation that's going to be repaid. None of that. Embrace them in the name of Christ. And what you'll ultimately be doing is receiving me. And not even me, for that matter. As he closes it up, he really says, and for him who sent me. The Father himself. That's who you'll be embracing. But it's not because they're going to be able to do something for you back. The reality is that pride cannot survive long in the light of the gospel. It really can't. It's out of place. It was not part of Jesus' life, neither should it be part of ours. And yet, often, it manages to find a foothold in our lives. I really enjoyed this. I think it's a tweet from Tony Merida. It said, "The gospel frees us from our addiction to ourselves." And I think, honestly, when you think about that, we can trace that all the way back to the Garden of Eden. What is it that Adam and Eve wanted more than anything else? They wanted that fruit not because they were hungry, but because they wanted to be like God. And they thought, He's holding out on us. He's not giving something to us that we desire, that we want. And so they took matters into their own hands. They said, we want this. We want to be like God. And they took it. And here we are. It's for reasons of these same kinds of pride or this lack of humility that you can explain the Holocaust. You can understand racism in general. That we can look at our spouses and demand so much from them. Serve me. Do these things for me. That we cannot celebrate the successes of other people. That we make infinite comparisons between ourselves and other people, trying to put them down and raise ourselves up. It is the source of so much strife and so much depression in our lives. Because we really do feel like we're better than those around us. Jesus not only told us how to be free, but He's going to demonstrate it by going to a cross. We, as we understand, have all fallen short of the glory of God. We do not measure up. And as blood-bought Christians, we, of all people, should understand that reality. There is nothing within me that can commend me before God. There's nothing that I have that has not been given to me. What do I really have to be prideful of or arrogant of? Christ died to set me free from my sin, from me. And now all I have is Christ. Not every good servant is a master, but every good master must also be a servant. And we have been called to be like Christ. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank You for this day. I thank You for this passage. Lord, again, as we see a little bit more of what You're doing with the disciples, leading them and teaching them, and not only just about Yourself and what's going to happen, but also taking from that this lesson to humility. Something that they're going to need a lot of, because as being the founders of laying the foundation of the church, Lord, it would be extremely easy to be consumed by pride and arrogance and not be marked by humility or servant leadership. And yet, Lord, as we consider our own selves, Lord, how often we fall into those same traps. And we've seen it. We've seen it all around us. People that even in preachers that we appreciate, that we maybe like, or that we know, can fall into this trap of lack of humility, a pride and an arrogance. But Lord, it's not just them. We can do that in every area of life and be consumed by these things. And yet, Lord, we're being consumed by the very things that You died to free us from. Lord, I pray that You would help us as individuals of this church be marked by humility, to have a desire to serve, and to serve people who we realize they will never give this back. They will never repay. And I'm okay with that. Help us to love, truly love our neighbors. That we would be marked by this very same attitude that You had towards the disciples, that You really had towards us, that You demonstrated when You went to the cross. And we thank You for showing us this. Now, Lord, help us to live it. In Christ's name, amen.